The woman stood in his doorway like a ghost made flesh, rain streaming from her dark hair, a bundle pressed tight against her chest. Thomas Brennan had seen plenty of desperate souls stumble onto his ranch over the years, but none had ever made his blood freeze the way this one did. Thomas, her voice cracked like autumn leaves. I need know. He gripped the door frame, knuckles white. You can't be here, Clara. But she was already pushing past him, that familiar stubborn tilt to her chin that had once made him foolish enough to think he could love her forever. The baby in her arms stirred, tiny fist breaking free from the worn blanket, and Thomas felt the world tilt sideways. Whose child? The words scraped his throat raw. Clara's laugh held no humor. You know whose. Outside, thunder rolled across the Colorado plains like cannon fire. Inside his small cabin, silence stretched taut as a hangman's rope. Thomas had spent 3 years convincing himself that Clara Whitmore was nothing but a fever dream, a mistake he'd made when grief over his dead wife still clawed at his chest. He'd been wrong about many things, but he'd never been wrong about those green eyes that now stared at him with desperate hope. My husband thinks the baby died, Clara whispered. Stillborn, they told him. But she lived, Thomas. She lived, and she has your eyes. The infant chose that moment to open those eyes, storm gray like his own, like his mother's before her, like no Whitmore had ever possessed. Recognition hit him like a mule kick to the chest. Clara, if Richard finds out, he won't. She stepped closer, and he caught the scent of jasmine that used to cling to her hair when she'd slip away from her husband's grand house to meet him by the river. No one knows I'm here. No one knows she exists except the midwife, and she's paid well enough to keep quiet. Through the rain-lashed window, Thomas saw lantern light bobbing in the distance, riders moving fast toward his ranch, his gut twisted into a familiar knot, the same one he'd carried through 2 years of Confederate cavalry charges. Clara, he said quietly, someone's coming. Clara spun toward the window, her face draining of color. No, it's too soon. I was careful. How careful? Thomas was already moving, pulling his rifle from above the mantel. Who else knows you're here? The stable boy saw me take the horse, but I paid him. Her voice broke. Oh God, what if he told Richard? The baby began to fuss, as if sensing the terror crackling between them. Clara bounced her gently, whispering wordless comfort, but her hands shook. Thomas had seen that same terror on soldiers' faces before battle, the moment when death became real instead of distant. There's a root cellar, he said. Hidden door behind the flour barrel. You can know. Clara's chin lifted with that stubborn pride he remembered too well. I won't hide like some criminal. She's my daughter. She's our daughter. Thomas corrected, the words tasting strange on his tongue, which means Richard Whitmore will kill us both if he finds her here. The hoofbeats grew louder, accompanied now by voices, male voices, angry and determined. Through the rain, Thomas caught fragments, saw her heading east. Check every farm, bring her back alive. Clara sank into his old wooden chair, clutching the baby like a talisman. He'll take her from me, Thomas. Richard will raise her as his own, and I'll never see her again. Or worse, he'll send her away, claim she died for real this time. And if he finds her here with me, he'll call it adultery. Hang you for it. Her voice went flat, emotionless. Then take her anyway. Thomas checked his rifle's load, muscle memory from too many nights standing watch in enemy territory. 6 bullets. Against how many men? The lantern light suggested at least 4 riders, maybe more. Richard Whitmore commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He wouldn't come alone, and he wouldn't come peaceful. There's a third option, Thomas said carefully. Clara's eyes met his. In them he saw the same desperate calculation he felt churning in his own chest. Love and survival rarely walked the same path, but sometimes they had to. I could claim her as mine, he continued. Tell them you came here seeking shelter, that the baby's father died in the war. It's not uncommon. Half the women in Colorado territory lost husbands to the fighting. Richard knows I was never married before him. Richard knows what people tell him, and people lie when they have reason to. Outside the voices grew closer. Soon they'd see the smoke from his chimney, the warm glow of his windows. Soon they'd knock, and Thomas would have to choose between the truth that would kill them all and a lie that might save them. The first knock came soft as a prayer, followed by Richard Whitmore's cultured voice cutting through the storm like a blade. "Thomas Brennan, I know you're in there. Open this door." Thomas met Clara's eyes across the small room. Terror had given way to something harder, more desperate, a mother's fury wrapped in silk and determination. The baby slept now, oblivious to the danger gathering like wolves outside her makeshift den. "Stay behind me," Thomas whispered, moving toward the door. "Whatever happens, don't let them see how scared you are." He lifted the latch with steady hands, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Richard Whitmore stood on the threshold, flanked by 4 ranch hands, all armed, all wet from the brutal rain. Water dripped from the brim of Richard's expensive hat as his pale eyes swept the cabin's interior. "Richard," Thomas kept his voice level. "Hell of a night to be riding." "Indeed." Richard stepped inside without invitation, his gaze finding Clara immediately. "My dear wife seems to have lost her way. I've come to escort her home." Clara rose from the chair, the baby still cradled against her chest. In the lamplight, she looked ethereal, untouchable, exactly the kind of woman who might drive men to murder. "I needed air, Richard." The house felt confining. Air? Richard's smile held no warmth. "In a thunderstorm, at the home of a man you've never mentioned knowing." The accusation hung between them like smoke. Thomas felt the familiar calm that used to settle over him before battle. Time slowing, sounds becoming sharper, the world narrowing to survival and split-second choices. "Mrs. Whitmore sought shelter from the storm," Thomas said. "Christian charity demands no less." Christian charity. Richard's attention shifted to the baby in Clara's arms. "And whose child would that be, I wonder? It seems rather young to be traveling in such weather." Clara's breathing quickened, but her voice remained steady. "She belongs to my cousin Martha in Denver. I was delivering her to relatives in Pueblo when the storm hit." "Martha." Richard stepped closer, close enough that Thomas could smell the whiskey on his breath, the expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the scent of violence. "I wasn't aware you had family in Denver, my dear. There's much about me you're not aware of." The words cracked like a whip across the cabin's tension. One of Richard's men shifted, hand drifting toward his gun. Thomas recognized the type hired killers who'd learned their trade in the war and never found their way back to civilization. "Perhaps," Richard said softly, "it's time we became better acquainted with the truth." He reached toward the baby, and Clara stepped backward, bumping against Thomas's chest. The contact sent electricity through him, memory and desire, and the terrible knowledge that everything they'd built in this moment was about to crumble. "The child stays with me," Clara said. Richard's hand froze inches from the blanket. "Does she now?" The baby chose that moment to wake, tiny face scrunching as she prepared to cry. Clara bounced her gently, humming a melody Thomas recognized, the same lullaby his own mother had sung to him during the dark nights after his father died. The sound seemed to soften something in the cabin's harsh atmosphere, reminding everyone present that beneath all the lies and accusations lay something innocent and fragile. "May I?" Thomas extended his hands toward the child. Clara hesitated, then carefully transferred the baby to his arms. The moment she settled against his chest, the infant's crying ceased. Her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, and those storm-gray eyes, so impossibly like his own, gazed up at him with complete trust. Richard watched this exchange with the focused intensity of a predator studying prey. "Remarkable," he murmured. "She seems quite taken with you, Brennan." "Children often calm around strangers," Thomas replied, though his heart hammered as he held his daughter for the first time. She smelled like Clara's jasmine perfume, and something uniquely baby-sweet, something that made protective instincts roar to life in his chest. "Indeed." Richard circled them slowly, like a lawyer building toward an accusation. "Tell me, Clara, what was your cousin Martha's maiden name?" Clara's face went white. Thomas saw the trap closing. Richard had never believed the story, had been waiting for exactly this moment to spring his snare. Clara's voice faltered. "You see," Richard continued conversationally, "I've made inquiries, There is no Martha in Denver, no cousin at all, in fact, which raises interesting questions about whose child you're truly protecting. Thomas felt the baby's heartbeat against his chest, fast and bird-fragile. In her innocent face he saw echoes of Clara's beauty and his own stubborn determination. This was his blood, his responsibility, his chance at redemption for all the things he'd failed to protect during the war. "The child is mine," he said quietly. The words fell into silence like stones into deep water. Richard's men tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Clara made a soft sound, protest or relief. Thomas couldn't tell. "Yours," Richard repeated. "How fascinating. And when exactly did this liaison occur?" Thomas met Richard's cold stare without flinching. "Does it matter? She's here now. She's mine now. She's my wife," Richard said, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Which makes any child she bears my business. Not this one." The baby gurgled, tiny hand patting Thomas's chest as if sensing the tension surrounding her. In that moment, holding her close while Clara stood beside him, and death waited just outside his door, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced since before the war, complete certainty about what mattered most. Richard's hand moved toward his gun, but Thomas was faster. The rifle came up smooth as silk, barrel centering on Richard's chest before the wealthy man could clear leather. Around them Richard's hired guns drew iron, but Thomas had positioned himself so that any shot fired at him would risk hitting Clara or the baby. "Seems we have ourselves a standoff," Thomas said calmly. "You're outnumbered 5-1, Brennan. Maybe, but you're the only one here who matters to your men. They won't risk you for revenge." Richard's eyes glittered with fury, but Thomas saw calculation there too. The man hadn't built his fortune by making reckless gambles. "What do you propose?" Thomas felt Clara's hand touch his shoulder, a gentle pressure that steadied his resolve. "Simple. You ride away, tonight. Tomorrow you file for divorce in Denver, claim irreconcilable differences. Clara stays here with the baby. And my reputation, your reputation survives. Grieving widower, tragic marriage to a woman who couldn't give you the heir you deserved. Society will sympathize." The baby made a soft cooing sound, and Thomas felt her tiny fingers curl around his shirt. She trusted him completely, this small person who carried his blood and Clara's courage. He wouldn't fail her the way he'd failed so many others. "You're asking me to give up a considerable investment," Richard said. "Clara's dowry alone. Keep the dowry. Keep the house, the land, everything. Just leave us in peace." Richard studied them for a long moment, Thomas with his rifle steady and unwavering, Clara with her chin raised in defiant pride, the baby sleeping peacefully in arms that would die before letting her come to harm. Something shifted in the wealthy man's expression, calculation giving way to resignation. "You realize," Richard said finally, "that if I ever see any of you in my territory again, this generous offer expires." "Understood." Richard holstered his weapon, signaling his men to do the same. "Then I believe our business is concluded." They filed out into the storm, leaving only the sound of rain against windows and the soft whisper of the baby's breathing. Clara sagged against Thomas, 3 years of fear and desperation finally releasing their hold. "Is it really over?" she whispered. Thomas set his rifle aside, but kept the baby cradled in his arms. "It's over." Years later, when his daughter learned to walk across the wide planks of their expanded ranch house, Clara would tell the story of the night they became a family. How love sometimes required the courage to claim it, how truth could be more dangerous than lies, and how some battles were worth fighting regardless of the odds. But on that storm-lashed night, as Clara curled against his side, and their daughter slept peacefully between them, Thomas simply held his family close, and listened to the rain wash away the last traces of their old lives, leaving only the promise of tomorrow gleaming bright as morning.